Historians Weekly podcast. As you probably know, we have guests on this show who are high school students who come on and teach us a little bit about history. Today, our guests are Kim and Heather from Millikan High School to teach us a little bit about what they know on the 15th Amendment. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show.
I'd like to answer the questions first.
Thanks for volunteering to start us off, Kim. So, what were some of the immediate effects of the Reconstruction of the 15th Amendment?
The 15th U.S. Amendment would state African American men have the constitutional power to vote by specifying that, regardless of race, color, or prior conditions of serfdom, right of citizens of the United States to vote should not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude.
Wow, the 15th Amendment really did a lot for allowing African Americans voting rights. But who were some of the historical groups of people who helped to get this amendment passed?
The Republican Party could be a broad organization. In all, it was voted by 39 Republicans, and just 5 Republicans did not agree with the 15th Amendment.
I'm curious, it sounded like the 15th Amendment mainly affected African Americans, but who else did the 15th Amendment affect?
The United States citizens' right on account of race, color, or formal condition of servitude not to vote shall be denied or abbreviated by the United States or by any state. It affects African American men and their right to vote.
Oh, so only African American men could vote. The 15th Amendment so far sounds like it did quite a lot to improve the lives of African Americans, but just how much did it actually affect their everyday life?
It legalized voting to African Americans, but it wasn't until 1965 that a major of African Americans could actually register and vote in significant numbers. The Voting Rights Act was passed. Thus, the 15th Amendment was a significant cornerstone for future freedom.
The 15th Amendment worked with the Voting Act of 1965 to allow a more widespread amount of African Americans to vote. That's really cool. So far, we've learned what the 15th Amendment is and what it does, but how was it originally formed? Did the people forming it receive any backlash from angry Southerners?
Perhaps hate or backlash are not the best terms, but it has certainly been looked at. Discriminatory policies have been used to prohibit Black people, especially in the South, from exercising their right to vote. In order to prevent them from voting, poll taxes and literacy tests were developed.
Thank you for those really solid answers, Kim, but I think it's time to move on to Heather and ask her a few questions. I'm really curious. Who were the major people involved in the Reconstruction?
President Andrew Johnson, who vetoed the Reconstruction, and Hiram Rhodes Revell, who was the first African American to sit in Congress, were important people in the reconstruction of the 15th Amendment.
Oh, that's really cool that Andrew Jackson realized just how much African Americans deserve the right to vote. Even with all the racism and slavery going on in the South, do you still think it was an appropriate time for him to pass this amendment?
The 15th Amendment needed to get passed so that there was more equality among Black and white people.
Yeah, I agree with you that it was better to pass the amendment sooner rather than later. With that being said, what did the 15th Amendment really change with everyday life?
The 15th Amendment made it so men of color could vote, saying, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." But it also caused other things like discrimination and violence used to make Black people more uncomfortable so they wouldn't vote.
Obviously, passing this amendment caused some racial issues, but who were the main people to complain about it being passed?
Some white people didn't agree with this amendment, especially in the South. Therefore, they used violence and discrimination to keep men of color from exercising their right to vote.
Oh, it looks like it's just about time for a quick commercial break. When we get back, our guest will answer just a few more questions and we'll wrap things up.
Hello, my name is President Grant, and I sponsored the 15th Amendment, in which doing this, I wrote a letter to Congress on March 30th, 1870, stating, "To the House and House of Representatives It is unusual to notify the two houses of Congress by message of promulgation by proclamation of the Secretary of State of the ratification of any constitutional amendment. In view, however, of the vast importance of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, this day declared a part of that revered instrument, I deem a departure from the usual custom justifiable, a measure which makes at once 4 million people voters who were here therefore declared by the highest tribunal in the land not citizens of the United States nor eligible to become so, is indeed a measure of grander importance than any other one act of the kind from the foundation of our free government to present day. Thank you, and signing off from President Grant.
And we're back. Thank you for waiting. We'll get right back into it with our few final questions. Kim, could you explain to us how the 15th Amendment is affecting us all the way in 2020?
Well, the amendments work still by safeguarding every American citizen against any nationality, color, or voting servitude.
If the 15th Amendment made such a huge impact on African American life when it was first passed, did they change anything to it after it was passed?
The amendment modified slowly over time, as women were only allowed to vote as before.
Wow, that's crazy. After all these years, they kept improving it and made it even better. Since you know so much about the amendment, what is one thing you would have changed to it before it was passed? What would you have added or removed from it?
One thing I would definitely change back to when it was written in 1870 is I would make sure to include sex as part of it to make it as clear as possible. Today, in today's day and age, in 2020, I would make sure to include that it should protect everyone regardless of their sexuality, religion, social status, or education, just in order to try to make it as clear as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sex should have been stated more clearly in the original 15th Amendment. Thank you, Kim, for sharing a bit of your knowledge with us. Let's go to Heather and ask, what was one lasting issue with this amendment when it was passed that we still have an issue with today?
An important lasting effect that came from this amendment was discrimination because we still see it today.
Unfortunately, discrimination has been a big part of American history, and despite it getting better over time, it is still a major issue in today's society. On the topic of discrimination, tell us a little bit about what the Jim Crow laws did.
In 1877, the Jim Crow laws were passed, which allowed for segregation in all public facilities and took away Black people's rights. Pleasley versus Ferguson was a landmark 1896 U.S. Supreme Court decision that upheld the constitutionality of radical segregation under the separate but equal doctrine.
Looks like we're running out of time. Let's wrap things up with the final question. Heather, do you think that the 15th Amendment affects life now like it did back in 1877?
No, it does not affect us more in modern life like it did when it was first passed. Now we think of everyone to be equal, and there is less discrimination than back then. I would try to fix the many loopholes that made it so African Americans couldn't vote.
The 15th Amendment did a lot to improve African American voting rights, but you're right, it wasn't perfect. Well, that's going to wrap up the show. Thank you folks for tuning in with us on this week's podcast to learn about the 15th Amendment. Also, let's give a huge thanks to Heather and Kim for coming on and sharing with us. See you here next week to learn about the 16th Amendment.